My name is Tehmina Akhtar. I'm the Senior Strategic Advisor at UNDP, Regional Bureau for Arab States. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to session 4 of today's Middle East Futures Forum 2022, which is being co-hosted by UNDP in partnership with the Middle East Institute. So it's my pleasure to invite you to this next session and to introduce you to our speaker for this fireside chat, who is Dr. Sara Kandirachi, the Research Director, Urban Planner, and Social Researcher at Arup. And she is the author of the recent report, Cities Alive, Designing Cities That Work for Women, which has been produced by Arup, UNDP, and the University of Liverpool. So welcome, Sara. It seems like it's gray in your city where you're joining from, just like for me here in New York.
Yeah, it's not gray, it's dark because it's now 5 o'clock in the afternoon. So I'm based in Milan right now, so it's getting dark. But today actually was a sunny day, so that's good.
Yeah, it's a bit overcast today here as well. So the report talks about designing cities for women. Could you tell us a little bit more about the report and its findings, which was recently launched last month, in fact, so it's very new. And also what is interesting about the report, given that we're talking about futures today, is that it talks about a fundamental shift in mindset. What is that futures mindset that we must shift to, and also the one that we must shift from if we are to design cities that work better for women?
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, this the report Cities Alive, Designing Cities That Work for Women is a collaboration, is the result of a collaboration between Arup, UNDP, and the University of Liverpool, and the results of a joint effort from a team of researchers from across the organization that I had the pleasure to lead. So the report, the first thing that we aim is to basically bring the attention on the way cities are planned and designed, and how these can have an impact on women. So we undertook a very comprehensive research. And also we engage different stakeholders, also many stakeholders, women groups including, to provide basically evidence and also a catalog of women's experiences in cities. In fact, many women will find the report sadly very familiar, because it outlines the challenges, the obstacles that many women across the world face in cities. And at the same time, the report shows that the design of cities has a major impact on their life. In fact, it can actually help or trigger their safety, their health, their access to education, and also access to employment. In fact, cities can actually add to gender inequalities. In fact, there is evidence showing that whether by accident or design, the way many cities are built often make women feel unsafe, and they fail to provide for their basic needs and also for their social economic also opportunities. One key finding of the report was that that a limited voice, that women are underrepresented in decision-making, in particular in relation to planning and design. And this, as a result, exacerbate and perpetuate the inequalities which exist in cities. Major challenge that we identify, of course, are related to safety and security in cities. For instance, one data statistic that I found very shocking is that in the UK, 97% of young women have experienced sexual harassments in public spaces. Another data that I found also very interesting is that only 29% of senior leadership positions are covered by women. Another statistic that I also found quite interesting is the fact that women are not only not represented in decision making, but also they don't have recognition in the public space, because only 2 to 3% of statues and monuments around the world represent women across the world, celebrate women across the world. And so in terms of mindset that you mentioned, there is definitely a need of a mindset. First of all, because as we know, over the past 3 decades, cities have been designed to be efficient, to be competitive, to be smart, and the needs of women, such as the needs of other vulnerable groups, overlooked. The needs of children, elderly people, they have not been taken into account into the design and planning of our cities. So as a result, we live in cities that are kind of gender neutral to some extent. And by doing this, they are excluding many groups of society, in particular the most vulnerable. So the first thing is to really rethink on how we design our cities. How can we put the women, the most vulnerable people of society, at the core of the design process? And to do that, the first thing is about engaging them into the design and planning decision-making process. Because there is a lot of talking about stakeholder engagement, community engagement, but in reality, the most vulnerable groups, including women, are not consulted or properly engaged in a meaningful way into the design of our cities because of lack of time, lack of budget, lack of resources. When we design cities, not everyone, of course, but the tendency is to engage only with the kind of traditional stakeholders, like institutional stakeholders, government authorities, city authorities, private investors sometimes, but the most vulnerable group are not engaged properly into the design in a participatory and meaningful way. So that is the first shift that is required, to engage with this group, to be creative also in finding ways, tools, methodology to engage with them. That tools that also respond to their needs, also to communication skills or capacities, engaging also people who don't read or they don't know how to read, but still they have a view in terms of how cities should be designed to their needs. So this is the first thing, to really change the way we engage with stakeholders and to really engage meaningful with communities into the process. The second shift is important to have a holistic approach because the moment we're trying to understand the relationship between people and places, we are dealing with two complex realities because people are complex, women are complex. And urban systems are also very, very complex. So it's very important that when we're trying to create urban systems that work for women, we mobilize a team with multiple disciplines that have the capacity to read the city, to engage with people, to really find the connection between what they want and how their needs can be translated into urban solutions. So it's very important to have an holistic and integrated approach. It's very important to look at challenges in an integrated way, while what is happening now is that in many cases, solutions are found using like a very silo approach. So people who look at climate only look at climate without looking at the social element of climate. Engineers, they look at the structure and the functional need of solutions without actually looking at the other functions or needs that those infrastructure can provide. So there is again a need. I'm a bit extreme in describing this, just to show that it's very important that we work, we mobilize different expertise in an integrated way because a holistic approach is important. The last shift that is required is collaboration. So all stakeholders have a role to play. Government authorities of different levels, city, national, regional authorities, they need to work hand in hand with academia, with think tanks, with technical experts. They need to work together with NGOs, community groups, and with the private sectors. The investors, they need to be involved. They need to be brought on board because in many cases they decide how cities are at the end designed or created because they invest, and so they need to be involved into the design, into the decision, they need to understand how a gender-responsive approach, for instance, to design is and works, and what are the contribution they can make, and in which moment in the life cycle of their project they can actually contribute. So just to conclude, it's very important to be strategic. At the same time, it's very important to be very pragmatic in finding solutions. In particular, if we started to look at solutions, looking at climate change or inequalities, because we need to find solutions quickly. At the same time, they need to be solutions that they can leave a legacy behind. They can have create social value, environmental value for the long term. You are muted.
This always happens. So I want to pick up on one of the things that you said. You said women are complex. People often say that women don't all think the same. They are not sort of one big block. But I think the report finds some common aspirations that women have reflected back to you. Could you maybe say 2 words about the methodology and the key themes that you are focusing the report on, just for our viewers to have a better understanding?
Yeah, absolutely. So women are complex, and also when the first thing that we try to do when we approach the report is defining what a woman is. So because the moment you start talking about gender and women is very complex. There is not such a definition that is accepted globally. So because we want the report to be globally relevant, that's why also the collaboration with UNDP is so important to this, to make sure that we were using the right terminology and we're using the right approach to be inclusive and consider different geographies globally. So in the report, we don't only talk about women, but when we talk about women in the report, just to be, again, pragmatic, we are considering women of different gender, identity, sexuality, different age groups, different socioeconomic conditions. And of course, there are differences across country because there are different levels of vulnerabilities, depending if you look at developing context or a more developed context. But still, especially after COVID, there are so many more people who have been facing poverty conditions, also in the kind of more developed context. But basically, based on our research, as I said, we're trying to really have an holistic approach to the topic because there is a lot of, there are many reports, many documents who talk about women in cities. But what we saw is that the issue was addressed only from a safety and security point of view. It seems that the only thing we can do with about women in cities is just increase their safety and security. And which is important, but we've been discussing this for the past 30 years and nothing major has changed. So something is wrong there. If you talk about women in cities, you need, as I said, to have an holistic approach. So you need to look beyond that. And so what we did is basically starting from what are the needs of a woman to fulfill to really, feel safe, to feel accomplished, to feel comfortable in the city. So we kind of create all these kind of identify different factors, and we try to group based on the research. So what we did is identify four key thematic areas or dimensions, which we use then through the report to understand the challenges and opportunities that women see and face in cities. At the same time, we are using these 4 areas also to frame solutions and also the recommendations for a gender-responsive approach to urban planning. So these 4 dimensions are safety and security as one, because it's very important, because we are so behind in addressing that. Justice and equity as well, we identify as an important area that we need to address to fully understand women in city and create better cities. Health and well-being. And when we talk about health and well-being, of course, is mental and physical. and then enrichment and fulfillment. So all these additional aspects that are normally overlooked because maybe they're not considered sufficiently important, but for a woman are extremely important to fulfill in life, to feel this sense of accomplishment. Those important.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sarah. So that's a great introduction to the report. I hope that many of our readers tuning in will pick it up and take a look at it and all of its rich findings and strategies. Let me turn now, shifting perhaps a bit to the context in the Middle East and North Africa region. I think, this is one of the regions that is quite heavily urbanized already. Many countries such as Kuwait, for example, or Qatar have like 100% urban populations or 99% urban populations. This varies, of course, but also there are many cities in the region that are growing at a very rapid rate. So it's estimated that they may grow by 4 to 5% in the next decade. And, often we think of urbanization as a sign of economic progress in the public perception. However, when there is unplanned or too rapid growth, it results in many problems such as overcrowding, issues of safety and security, lack of adequate services, mobility challenges for many residents, including women, also increased care burdens and different types of care burdens emerge. You also have pollution and unhealthy living conditions affecting many residents of urban areas, and also increased stress sometimes in urban environments, as we saw with the pandemic as well, this largely affecting the urban populations and causing much additional stress. So in the Arab states as well, urban populations sometimes grow due to unplanned and unscheduled, unexpected reasons such as displacement due to conflict or due to disasters, natural disasters, climate impacts as well. And this is indeed true for many other regions as well. So I guess my question is a two-part question. The first part is, what can urban leaders do today to plan better for tomorrow? And how can they get ahead of the challenges to basically address the needs before this rapid and unplanned growth happens? That's the first question. And then the second part of the question is, how can we ensure that opportunities are available for women in these rapidly growing urban environments in the developing world and in the MENA region? And how can the region address some of the challenges to provide better prospects for women in terms of enabling them to reach their full potential, benefiting from equal opportunities for education, jobs, self-realization? I want to also give you the context that in the region in Middle East and North Africa, women are only about 20% of women form the labor force. And this is one of the lowest percentages in, among other regions as well. So, there are clearly obstacles that are preventing women from tapping into all opportunities. So would love to hear your thoughts.
Thank you. That's a very complex question. But so the conditions of women across the globe, as you will see of the report, are many. Basically, women are facing many intersectional challenges and barriers, and of course, in developing contexts like in the MENA region, all these are exacerbated by other challenges which are related to urbanization, which are related to climate change, which are related to lack of employment or difficulties in accessing education. So, of course, the situation is more complicated. I think also in terms of the MENA region, there's also some kind of the context where women traditionally they don't work in many cases once they are married. I don't want to generalize, but that's what data says. And of course, this is
they have an incredible care burden placed on them too. It's very true that women in the region they work on unpaid care work around 5 to 6 times the amount of time that men spend, and this is higher than the global average. So you're absolutely right about that.
Yeah, and of course, the situation is to some extent improving. There are more women who are completing tertiary education, but this doesn't always translate into working opportunities because of cultural outcomes, because if you're married, you can't work. In addition to that, there are additional obstacles that are a burden for women. Access to water is one of them, definitely, because women, in many cases, have to spend a lot of time to fetch water, to collect water, time that could be used to go to school, to go to work, to do other things. But so this is definitely the lack of access to water is definitely another thing that is very serious in that region.
I think also for some of the bigger cities, I think mobility and safe mobility is a very huge factor as well. If women don't feel safe getting from home to school or from home to university or to work, it will really definitely impact on their, vision of what they see themselves doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And this, unfortunately, not only in the MENA region, but in globally, also in New York, I was reading some statistics there that women also have to spend a lot of money, a lot of their income to pay for private taxis because they feel unsafe in public transportation, which in the case of Africa, for instance, in the MENA region, the only option is to take a very overcrowded buses, walking, or in some cases also cycling, but in the conditions are unsafe. They're not good for their safety. So all these elements, this time that they spend for caregiving, for doing basic things like collecting water, is all or the lack of access to good mobility options that are affordable. All these are additional elements that create that makes the condition of women in these cities even more difficult. In terms of what city authorities should do to overcome these issues, that of course is a matter of prioritizing or informing the investments that are happening in these cities in a way that are done considering the needs of women, because there are major investments done which only consider economic returns or functional needs of people. So housing, but not necessarily maybe housing that really respond to the specific needs of the population living in those houses. So it's very important that investments, master plans, solutions that are designed in this context are really designed trying to create multiple benefits. And it is possible, sometimes only a matter of taking the time to do it, because the investment to create a bridge or a nice bridge is basically the same. It's just maybe you need some additional design effort to do it. But the investment of the infrastructure is basically, at the end, the cost is the same to make it more resilient, to make it more human-centered, rather than only functional for cars, for instance. Yeah. So it's looking at a bit at the 4 dimensions that we identified in the publication. I could maybe make some suggestions in terms of practical things that city authorities should prioritize in the work that they do. For instance, to improve women's safety and security, is important to create safer streets, safer public spaces by design. So safety needs to be embedded into the way these streets and spaces are designed, looking at the lighting system, how big they are, how they are designed, if there are green infrastructure as well. So looking at all these design elements that should be embedded in the way they are designed. they need to provide a safe mobility experience, as you mentioned. And also, another important thing is about climate change, because women are particularly affected by the impact of climate change. So to make women safe and secure in cities is also important to integrate a gender-responsive approach into urban climate strategies and plans. On the other hand, to increase the justice and equity conditions of women in cities is very important to mainstream gender-responsive planning in national laws and policies, and also, as I said before, to support the participation, the real participation of women in urban governance, in decision-making and planning. Another important thing to enable this is to support the availability and collection of gender disaggregated data, because in many cases, in particular for climate change, there are no gender disaggregated data. So if you don't have the data, it's very difficult to understand how big the problem is.
Yeah.
And so from the solution that you need to develop. And then for enhancing the health and well-being of women, as I said, both from a mental point of view, but also from a physical point of view, it's very important to create public spaces, green spaces that are inclusive, that enable active mobility, and also it's very important, particularly in the MENA region, to improve access to healthcare, nutrition facilities, and also to adequate water, hygiene, and sanitation facilities is also very, very important. And to conclude with the four dimension, which is about enrichment and fulfillment, there are other things that needs to be done. The first of all is about education, create formal and informal opportunities for learning, education, also maybe through play, for instance. Learning through play is extremely important, an informal way of learning for girls, for women in general. And also it's important to think about leisure activities, cultural activities. So we need to provide spaces for leisure activities which are safe. And also, as I said before, it's very important to recognize women's history and legacy in statues and in monuments around the world. Yeah.
Great, thank you very much. So I'd like to turn to another point now, which is regarding how do we ensure equity in cities, and how do we invest in low-income neighborhoods? Because from my experience living in several cities, you find often that resources are spent to a really large degree in the center of town or the main street. And these areas are constantly beautified, things are planted, they look great. It's also sort of the vision that the city wants to present to the world as well. These are often areas that are centers of power, and indeed designed in such a way to have wider streets, to have open avenues, in terms of the way they look. But the further away we go from the city center, the more crowded, the more, the less amenities, the less resources, more decrepit neighborhoods appear. So how do city leaders and stakeholders create the right conditions for everyone to thrive? And what can be done to ensure that, the way budgets are spent, the way infrastructure is commissioned, and also the extent to which services are extended also reaches other parts of the city that might be further away?
Well, thanks. This is a very important question because it's very important. I mean, in particular, in the MENA region, the big majority of people live in vulnerable contexts, in informal settlements. Like when I spent 12 years in Africa, living in Africa, and working a lot when I was with the UN, working a lot with Slum Grading programs. Also, like when I was in Maputo, I remember like 80% of the population lives in informal settlements. And still, majority of investments are in kind of a more formal kind of part of the city. Again, to, as you said, to make the city more attractive, smarter, and But still, I mean, of course, there are a lot of investments also going into informal settlements. There are many, many programs led by government, WP as well, UN Habitat on informal settlement operating.
Could you speak a little closer to the mic,
yeah,
Dr. Raji? It's a little hard to hear you.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
I was saying that there are many investments also going into, can you hear me better?
Yes, better now.
Okay. There are many investments also going into informal settlements, where the majority, there are millions of 1 million people around the world is estimated to live in these settlements. So how can we make the most of it? How can we make the most of these interventions? So on one hand, as I said, investments that are done in the city center, they should also consider the vulnerable groups. So mixed use of spaces, trying to create also social housing in formal investment in informal areas. So it's very important to that these investments are done also considering what are the needs of the population living in that city.
Thank you so much. I think those are some really excellent insights that you've offered, a lot for us to think about. I'd like, in closing, maybe if you could imagine what an ideal city in the future, say in like a decade's time, would look like, where women's needs were taken into consideration and they were involved, let's say, in the designing and planning of it. What would it look like, and how would it cater to the needs of all?
Yeah. So thank you. Yeah. I mean,
including future generations, actually.
Yeah. Yeah. So my ideal city of the future is a city where people of different ages, different backgrounds can live and enjoy the space in a way that is inclusive and is equal. To do that, it's very important that people have access to good mobility. My ideal city is a city without cars. For me, an ideal city is a city where you can walk, or when you need to, you can bike in a safe way, or you use public transport. I think the majority of cities around the world, they don't need cars to survive, including London. They could, survive and people without cars. In fact, when I was living there, I didn't have any car. So a city without cars, a city with bicycles. So to support active mobility, sport a lot. A green city, a city where eventually people are back into nature, because sometimes in most of cases we think that we're not part of nature and we treat nature as something that doesn't belong to us. While I see a city where it's possible to actually, for nature to live with people and not people who live with nature. So where we give greater emphasis on biodiversity, on bringing nature back into cities, because this has a tremendous positive impacts on our well-being, and not only for women, but for children, for elderly people, for men, for everyone. Is a city where I can go around and feel safe and secure without worrying if it's dark or not, if I'm alone or with someone else. And is a city where I have access to many opportunities, which needs to be affordable, because there is no point to have many opportunities if you cannot afford them and you cannot access them, also from like an economic point of view and a social point of view as well. So.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much. I think that sounds like a wonderful city to live in. Just maybe I can add one thing to it, also a city that is kind. I think this is one thing that I found, where people care for one another and, neighbors care for one another. I think it makes that lived experience so much better, where there is social cohesion and, empathy and kindness as well. Thank you so much, Dr. Sara Kanderachi, for the remarks today, for your insights, and for joining us at the Middle East Futures Forum. Thank you to you.
Thank you for inviting me. It was a pleasure.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Hello again. This is Stephen Kenny, the director of the Strategic Foresight Initiative program here at MEI. And we've come to the conclusion of our second annual MEI Futures Forum with that conversation between Dr. Sarah Kandarachii and Tamina Akhtar from UNDP. I want to thank all of you from around the world who have joined us for today's forum. We're grateful for your participation and hope that you found it an interesting and fulfilling day. Our aim in this conference, our aim in all of the work of the Strategic Foresight Initiative program is not just to consider the present day realities of the Middle East and North Africa region, but much more importantly, to consider the future conditions and opportunities that we want to collectively create into the future tomorrow realities of the region. I want to thank all of our speakers and panelists and moderators for their time and their immensely valuable insights that they've shared with us today. And I want to especially thank our partners at UNDP, Dr. Khalida Bouzar and her remarkable team at the Regional Bureau of Arab States, in particular Tamina Akhtar, and also to Naru Ashiki in the UNDP Administrator's Office in New York. We value the partnership with you, UNDP, and look forward to continuing our work with you and continuing all of our work here that we'll continue to share with all of you in our audience in our future work in this program. The recordings from today's forum will be available on the MEI website in short order, and we encourage you all to share those with others who may not have been able to join us today. So again, my thanks to all of you who joined us, my thanks to the speakers and moderators, and we will see you again at next year's Future Forum and at other events.